Mr. Petrović, please proceed.
Hvala, časni sud.
Thank you, Your Honor. As our closing arguments continue, I would like to address very briefly the events in Doboj, some aspects of those events in the year 1992. In this context, the prosecution alleges that Simatović visited Ozren several times and in doing so relies on the evidence of witness JF005. Now, in order to deal with the testimony of that witness, Your Honors, I would like to move into private session.
We move into private session.
'61 to '62.
Tužilac u svom završnom podnesu
In their final brief, the prosecution lists
We are in open session. We are in open session. Please proceed.
Hvala, časni sude. Tužilac u svom završnom podnesku
In their final brief, the prosecution lists 3 events that should convince the trial chamber about the existence of the intent on Simatović's part in relation to the events that he is charged with. These 3 events should provide the basis for the existence of this intent through direct reference to what he said and what he did. In this context, the prosecution draws our attention to the events in Lovinac, we've already addressed that, in Vukovar, ditto, and the events in Eastern Bosnia in the first half of 1993. If we're talking about the events in 1993 in Eastern Bosnia, we are talking about an operation that was codenamed Strike, Udar. In the final brief, in the part under the heading VRS under Mladić, VJ and Simatović planned and carried out operations in Eastern Bosnia in line with the JCE, paragraphs 133 through 136 of the final brief, lists its conclusions regarding this operation, Operation Strike. As I've already noted, this operation is again invoked in the part of the final brief where they talk about Simatović's intent to implement the joint criminal enterprise. The heading is Simatović personally took part in the planning of Operation Strike and the exercise of command of the units in this operation. That's paragraph 698. The prosecution's allegations regarding Operation Strike is a very good example of how the prosecution embarks on a fishing expedition searching for any kind of evidence against Simatović, using fragments of evidence, interpreting them out of context, exaggerating their importance, and presenting them as evidence that should create an impression of a general pattern of conduct. The defense has dealt with Operation Strike in its final brief in paragraphs 1058 through 1059, but we would now like to respond to some of the arguments presented by the prosecution. The very heading of the 2 sections of the final brief indicated that the prosecution wants to suggest that Simatović planned and carried out the operation hand in hand with Mladić and the VJ. The evidence shows that the opposite was the case. In the analysis of combat operations in Operation Strike, that's P3118, states that Operation Strike was carried out on the basis of a combat order issued by the VRS main staff on the 15th of February 1993. The Drina Corps issued its own combat order on the 12th of February 1993, and the preliminary order issued on the 20th of February 1993 shows that the plan for Operation Strike had been drafted before that time. All the other orders that were issued within the framework of this operation were drafted several weeks after the meeting that was allegedly attended by Simatović, and it is very difficult to establish a link between them and the discussions at the meeting. Likewise, Exhibit P3118 specifies who controlled Operation Strike, lists all the forces that were deployed, and we can see that those forces came from the Drina Corps, and there is a separate list of the forces that were not part of the Drina Corps but took part in the operation. If we look at this exhibit, we can see that Simatović is not there, and we cannot see any evidence of any unit that would directly or indirectly be linked with him. A detailed order of the Drina Corps for Operation Strike is dated the 12th of February 1993 and is also on record as Exhibit P3085. This exhibit also shows when the plans were made, who made the plans, which units took part in the operation, and in what positions. Finally, prosecution witness Mano Milovanović, as the highest ranking and indeed the only VRS officer to testify at this trial, states that he knew that Operation Strike had been planned, but that it had never been carried out. I would like to refer you to transcript pages 4437 through 4438. Thus, the prosecution has in front of it an entry from Mladić's diary stating that Simatović attended a meeting. If you look at the original of the entry, you can see that Simatović's name was added subsequently to the entry that pertains to the 28th of February 1993. You can see that from the way in which his name and the names of two other persons is inserted between two lines in this entry. Simatović did not say anything at the meeting. We don't know why he came. We don't know how long he remained there. All this is immaterial for the prosecution. The prosecution, indeed, interprets Simatović's presence there as evidence that he took part in the planning and as proof that VRS was under Simatović's command. Evidence can be interpreted in any number of ways. It can be interpreted in various contexts, but facts that do not exist cannot become evidence that merits any kind of discussion. Evidence of Operation Strike on record is complete, including Milovanović's testimony, which is also there. Any effort to squeeze in Simatović in some kind of a role is not based on the evidence. Now I would like very briefly to say something about something that the prosecution used as a motto of some sort for the closing chapter of its final brief. In the brief dealing with the crimes in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the prosecution uses Šešel's statement made at the time while the war was still going on paragraph 486 of the prosecution's brief. At the time when he made the statement, Šešelj was in political conflict with Milošević, and everything that Šešelj said at the time was fruit of his political propaganda. Šešelj is on trial before this tribunal for his actions from that time, and he is in the UN detention unit and is accessible to the prosecution. However, the prosecution did not call Šešelj as its witness. If it really believes that Šešelj credibly and truthfully describes the events, that would be the only and logical way to proceed. But the prosecution prefers to use fragments of Šešelj's political propaganda, of his tirades in the that he made in the 90s, and wants the trial chamber to trust what Šešelj is saying. The prosecution quotes what Šešelj had said in a documentary series, The Death of Yugoslavia, 6 times. Not only does the prosecution quote Šešelj, Šešelj's words are used as a motto of a whole chapter in the prosecution brief, and this chapter contains 43 pages. The prosecution objected to Šešelj's statements being admitted into the case file, and we still believe that Šešelj's statements from the 90s cannot be used as a basis for any relevant conclusions in the context of this case. Šešelj wrote hundreds of books, many of them while in detention, and many claims he made in those books are questionable, to say the least, in terms of their reliability and truthfulness, and cannot be used in these proceedings or indeed any other proceedings. Now I would like us to move into private session, Your Honors.
Before we do so, Mr. Petrovic, I think you referred us to paragraphs 1058 and 1059 for Operation Udar, Operation Strike. Now, I do not find even one reference in those paragraphs in your final brief, because that's what we are talking about, isn't it? It is, the heading is Simatović and Bajna Bashta, and that's before 1057. And then we move to 1058 and 1059.
Samo trenutak, časni sud, ako mi dozvolite da...
Just a moment, Your Honors. Let me just have a look.
Ako dozvolite, kada budemo imali priliku...
As we respond to the prosecution's arguments, I will use one sentence to explain that it may have been a typo or something like that. I don't have it now.
We're trying to find all the references you're making. If you could assist us at a later stage, that's appreciated. Please proceed. And I think you wanted us to
Thank you very much.
turn into private session, and we are close to the time, well, let's say 5 to 8 minutes where you are supposed to conclude. Please proceed. If I said 5 to 8, that's perhaps, it is, I would say, 8 to 12. Please proceed.
Hvala.
Thank you.
Open session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Registrar.
Rekao bih...
Thank you, Your Honor. Now I would like to say a few words about the so-called payroll lists. There are dozens of JATD payroll lists in the case file in this case, and out of all of those payroll lists, only 5 are signed by Simatović. In each of these documents, it is clearly stated that Simatović signed them for Deputy Commander Milan Radonjić. Had Simatović really been the JATD commander, as the prosecution alleges, there is no reason why he would want to conceal this fact in an internal document of the service in 1994 and 1995. It is a notorious fact that a commander would not sign a document instead of his deputy using the formula 4 in the signature block. Finally, we would like to conclude our closing argument by saying this. All the arguments presented today in court and yesterday in court and in our final brief paint a clear picture of the position and role that Simatović had in the relevant time in light of the indictment. The prosecution is trying to prove that Simatović had discriminatory intent, trying to portray Simatović as a man fighting for a greater Serbia without other nations and peoples, as a man who destroys and expels all those who are not Serb. The prosecution is trying to attribute this to a man whose family has deep roots in Croatia, whose relatives lived in Croatia during the war and who still live there. The prosecution is trying to attribute this to Simatović, a man who never said or did anything against any other man, other state, or other nation. Every action Simatović took was taken in line with the rules of the service that he belonged to, with the laws and the constitution of the country in which he lived. Simatović was an intelligence agent, and intelligence work requires people to go abroad, calls for contacts with all sorts of people. You have to be close to the events, you have to establish your intelligence contacts and networks. All these activities are defined by the rules of the service, and Simatović never deviated from them. Simatović did not commit a single crime. Simatović did not aid in the commission of a single crime. Your Honors, the defense is convinced that there is every reason for this trial chamber to acquit Simatović and believes that the trial chamber will do so once it has looked at all the arguments presented by the defense in the final brief and in our closing arguments. Thank you very much, Your Honors.
Thank you, Mr. Petrovic. Before we continue, could I ask to go into a private session for a second?
There is an open session.
Thank you, Mr. Registrar. Mr. Groom.
Your Honor, Ms. Maxine Marcus will present the prosecution submissions in rebuttal.
Yes, and it has been scheduled for 1 hour. I would say that you use 45 minutes, that we then take a break, and then you reserve your last 50 minutes for after the break.
I'll do my best, Your Honor. Thank you.
We will be very strict on time, so I appreciate that you do your best, Ms. Marcus, but it's the result that counts primarily. Please proceed.
Your Honors, good afternoon. This afternoon, I will correct some misrepresentations made by defense counsel during their closing submissions. I will correct their submissions on matters of corroboration. I will challenge their closing assertions regarding the Kula ceremony and the evidence of JF 39. I will correct their closing misrepresentations regarding the evidence of the relationships between key JCE members and the accused. I will respond to their ineffective attempt, yet again, to challenge the sufficiency of the pleadings. And finally, I will respond to their submissions regarding mens rea. I also have a few slides to accompany my submissions. The Stanišić defense argues at transcript 20298 that intercept P671 is obviously a forgery because the audio of that intercept does not exist. The prosecution seeks to remind your honors that the chamber has admitted the corresponding monitor note as P716, which is a contemporaneous record that the monitors prepared at the time that the conversation was recorded. The monitor note appears on the same page as another admitted intercept, P670, for which the audio does exist, and the content of which is consistent with and related to the content of P671. This demonstrates the authenticity of the monitor note and attests to the reliability of the intercept. At transcript 20290-91, the Stanišić defense argue that according to JF 32, Bogunović should have been at the meeting in Dal with Stanišić, but that Bogunović did not confirm that evidence. Upon review of the evidence, however, it is clear that JF 32 never said that Bogunović was there. JF 32 testified that a policeman named Borislav Bogdanović was one of the police officers who were with him when Stanišić arrived. That's at transcript 4757. When the Stanišić defense later suggested to JF 32 in cross-examination that Borislav Bogunović had been there, his answer was that he did not remember Minister Bogunović being present. That's at transcript 4760. I also refer your honors to transcript page 4758, where the prosecution pointed out to defense counsel that the witness had spoken about a Bogdanović and not a Bogunović, and he acknowledged and accepted this correction. I will now discuss the matter of corroboration raised by the defense in their closing. The Stanišić defense has argued that the prosecution relies on the Mladić notebooks without corroboration, which, quote, is likely to create the conditions for a miscarriage of justice, unquote. That's at page 20271. The Mladić notebooks are not a special class of evidence that require special corroboration, but must be individually weighed and assessed by the chamber, like all evidence. I refer the chamber to its decision admitting the notebooks on the 10th of March, 2011, which declines to require corroboration for admission and sets forth several factors showing the notebooks to be reliable. On slide 26 of their closing arguments, the defense cited to the prosecution's statement on the 21st of March of 2012 that the prosecution had tendered only portions of the notebooks that we believed to be corroborated by other evidence before the chamber. The prosecution's argument regarding the reliability of the excerpts that we tendered did not create a new, higher burden for these pieces of evidence. Can I please have slide 2? Regardless, the Mladić notebooks are well corroborated, and slide 2 sets forth some of the corroborating evidence for the first 3 items challenged by the defense's slide 28 as examples. Stanišić takes an extremely narrow view of the meaning of corroborative evidence, both in the context of the Mladić notebooks, where corroboration is not specially required, as well as in the context of 92 Quater evidence. Taking the first example on slide 2, P3215 and P3216 are excerpts from notebooks from the latter half of 1991. They are cited in the brief for the proposition that Mladić had the number for Golubić from 1991. The notebooks are corroborated by other evidence of phone numbers that match the phone numbers in the Mladić notebooks, and by other evidence that Golubić was relevant to Mladić at the time. Obviously, neither of those pieces of corroborating evidence would be cited in our brief for the fact that Mladić had the Golubić phone number. But the corroborative evidence makes this fact all the more reliable. Slide 28 of the defense closing lists 18 examples of propositions in the prosecution's brief that cite exclusively to the Mladić notebooks. This same analysis I have just done can also be done for each of those examples, and in many cases, the corroboration is found in the same or in adjacent paragraphs. Slide 3, please. On the matter of corroboration of 92 Quater evidence, I refer the Chamber to the decision on appeal against the Martić trial chamber's decision on the evidence of witness Milan Babić. That is dated the 14th of September 2006 in paragraph 22, which states, quote, "Evidence which has not been cross-examined and goes to the acts and conduct of the accused or is pivotal to the prosecution case will require corroboration if used to establish a conviction," unquote. I note for the Chamber also the decision of the Appeals Chamber in the Perlich case dated 23 November 2007 at paragraph 59. I will now turn to the corroboration of witness JF39. Throughout their submissions yesterday and today, both defense teams claimed that the prosecution is asking the Chamber to take a partial view of the evidence. In fact, it is the defense that wishes, Your Honors, to take a partial view of the evidence, particularly when it comes to the corroboration of prosecution witnesses. JF39 is very solidly corroborated. For example, we heard a lot yesterday about how laughable was JF39's testimony about the close relationship between Stanišić and Martić. But, Your Honors, Jovica Stanišić's name is the first name on P428, a list of persons receiving awards from the RSK MUP for demonstrated bravery, self-sacrifice, or exceptional contribution to the RSK Internal Affairs Services. C15 testified that Martić referred to Stanišić as his, quote, only and first commander, unquote, at transcript 1624. Other exhibits, such as P995, P12, and P2667 also corroborate JF39 on this point. If the Chamber takes the defense at their word and views the evidence as a whole, it will find that JF39 is well corroborated by independent evidence. We don't have time today to go into every aspect of JF39's evidence, but he is equally well corroborated on other points. For example, his evidence about the relationship between the DB and Captain Dragan is corroborated by P61, P3251, P1069, P1186, and P2976, as well as other evidence. He is also corroborated by Babić. Babić and JF39 viewed events from their respective positions, and their opportunities to observe events and people varied as well. Yet they are remarkably consistent. Even the supposed contradiction between Babić and JF39 yesterday, asserting that Babić was completely unaware of arrangements between Martić and Stanišić prior to March 1991, is inaccurate. That's at page 202, 74, and 75. Babić was certainly aware that Martić and Stanišić were meeting together in August 1990 because Babić met Martić and Stanišić together at a cafe between Knin and Golubic at that time. That's P1877, pages 96 to 98, and pages 56 to 59. I'm sorry, the second page is referred to exhibit P1878, pages 56 through 59. He also knew that Martić received weapons and the Knin police station distributed weapons from August 1990. He testified that some of the same people who brought weapons to Martić in 1990 later distributed weapons they had obtained through Stanišić. That's P1878 at page 40 and page 149. Moreover, Babić's testimony reveals that when he met Milošević in March of 1991, it became apparent that Milošević, Bogdanović, and Stanišić had already been involved in sending weapons to the Krajina without Babić's knowledge. Bogdanović told him, "You don't have to know everything." That's P1878, pages 153 to 154. JF39's and Babić's different levels of knowledge about these events simply reflects their different positions and different relationships. It is certainly not evidence of perjury. I will now respond to submissions made regarding the Kula ceremony. Slide 4, please. Your Honors, the defense continued to maintain that the Kula award ceremony was an elaborate ruse intended to impress Milošević. This argument is nonsense, as is clearly shown by the fact that the ceremony continued after Milošević left. At 41 minutes and 42 seconds of P61, Milošević gets into a large black Mercedes and drives off. What happens after that? There are no congratulations to each other at the performance for Milošević. The ceremony continues as before, with perhaps a bit less formality. Stanišić gives Captain Dragan an award, and he says he is proud to present it. He and Simatović both embrace Captain Dragan. Opačić salutes Stanišić, who then gives him an award. Stanišić then gives a brief speech recognizing Opačić for his heroism in the Knin area and also another member from the Banja area. Your Honors, Milošević is gone. Nothing that is happening at this point in the ceremony could possibly be for his benefit or to impress him. Nevertheless, what happens after Milošević leaves is completely consistent with what happened while he was there. We heard defense counsel yesterday at page 20299 attempt to dismiss the accused's embrace of Captain Dragan by paraphrasing Frank Sinatra, "A kiss is but a kiss, a hug is but a hug." It was a clever device, designed, no doubt, to diminish, with honor, the significance of this event, of this evidence. But when Stanišić warmly embraces a man whose activities and intentions he claims to have been suspicious of, when Simatović warmly embraces a man he claims he never had any contacts with, a hug is not just a hug. Your Honors, the next part of my submission will discuss the relationship between the accused and key JCE members. Slide 5, please. I will start with the relationship between Stanišić and Karadzic. The Stanišić defense seemed to suggest yesterday that the prosecution's case about the relationship between Karadzic and Stanišić rested entirely on intercepted conversations from before the war. This ignores Exhibit P2532, the record of the meeting in Belgrade in December 1993, at which Stanišić asked Karadzic how Serbia could help him. And Karadzic then evaluated the progress of the war in terms of the 6 strategic goals. And, Your Honors, despite the defense's repeated arguments that Mladić was somehow attempting to incriminate Stanišić with his notebooks, the fact is, this meeting really occurred. Your Honors heard evidence from someone who attended it. General Milovanović confirmed that this meeting occurred and confirmed the details of this notebook entry in some detail at transcript pages 15445 to 15448. It's because of Milovanović that we know that the meeting took place at the DB building. Simatović also unconvincingly attempts to minimize his relationship with Karadzic. They emphasize that P693 is the only recorded conversation between Simatović and Karadzic, and they ask Your Honors to conclude, based on that it was not a close relationship. That's at transcript 20323. But this intercept shows that Simatović and Karadzic knew each other, had close personal regard for each other, and viewed themselves as being engaged in a common project. I refer Your Honors to paragraphs 115 to 117 of our final brief and transcript page 11055 for more on this intercept. Similarly, the Simatović defense takes an unduly restrictive view of the relationship between Mladić and Simatović, emphasizing that there is evidence of them attending just 2 meetings together. This argument, also made today at temporary transcript, page 31, ignores the importance of one of those meetings, the one regarding Operation Udar, recorded in P392. That meeting was attended by the top leadership of the VJ and the VRS and concerned a major military operation in eastern Bosnia that was part of a larger VRS plan to drive out the Muslim population from that region, as set out in the 3rd strategic goal. I refer the Chamber to paragraphs 133 to 137 of our brief. The fact that Mladić and Simatović attended this meeting together clearly shows that they shared this common goal. I would note that the participation of Simatović and the Red Berets in this operation is established by the evidence that I cited in slide 2 of the rebuttal slides. Simatović has made several attempts to deny responsibility for crimes, arguing that he was not physically present. First in the Krajina, yesterday, first at 2:03:25-6, and then today at temporary transcript, page 15. As the Chamber noted, in its decision to admit Simatović's passport on the 5th of July, 2012, quote, The prosecutor does not allege that the accused physically and personally committed any of the crimes he has been charged with. In other words, it is not necessary for the accused to have been physically present in the region where the crimes were committed in order to be criminally responsible for them." Unquote. A few words about the Simatović defense claims in their submissions today. In their final brief, the Simatović defense stated, quote, "The foregoing evidence shows clearly and beyond doubt that Daniel Snedden, aka Captain Dragan, had no contacts or connections with the Serbian DB," unquote. That is paragraph 295. During their submissions today, they appear to accept that Simatović did meet with Captain Dragan in April 1991, as outlined in P3251. Of the meeting, they said it is, quote, "quite obvious that this is an interview between an operative and a person they were investigating," unquote. That is today's transcript at page 6. What they did not explain is how a claim of no contact or connections between Dragan and Simatović is consistent with an obvious record of an interview between Captain Dragan and Simatović. They also claimed that we were selectively quoting Captain Dragan's words in P2976, the unit video, and that Captain Dragan was probably being ironic when he described his relationship with Simatović as a kind of friendship. According to the defense, quote, "He's talking about a relationship that can be interpreted in any number of ways," unquote. That was today's transcript at page 8. I would just remind your honors of another thing that Dragan says in P2976. He says, quote, "The unit existed at all times, formally or informally, whether with 15 people in it or 300 at the end. I commanded the unit in one period, Frankie in another, Legia in yet another, but the unit existed at all times," unquote. That's P2976 at page 17. Your honors, this is not a relationship that can be interpreted in any number of ways. Simatović and Dragan cooperated in the establishment, training, and command of a special unit. Regarding P2673, the armored train document, the defense's arguments are strained and unpersuasive. They rely first on the language, claiming that the document is written in the Iakavski dialect, which Simatović would not have used. Leaving aside the question of whether that is accurate or not, Simatović could certainly have approved and signed the document without having typed every word himself. Arguably, that would be more likely. The Simatović defense also rely on the stamp of P2673, in which they see a checkerboard. While one Simatović defense witness, DFS 14, described the stamp as containing a checkerboard, a Stanišić defense witness gave what we submit is far more accurate evidence about the smudge at the bottom of the page. When asked by the Simatović defense whether he saw a checkerboard in the stamp, witness Mile Bosnić said, quote, "You mean these blots here?" unquote. He then says, quote, "I can't make out anything at all," unquote. That's at transcript page 12879. These blots are no basis on which to dismiss the document. Your Honors, a few words about notice. Slide 6, please. This particular challenge to the sufficiency of the pleadings in this case, which is raised by the Stanišić defense in their final trial brief and now in their closing submissions, was already sensibly decided by the pretrial chamber in this case in 2003 and in 2006. Although the defense tried to re-argue this matter of the sufficiency of the pleadings in 2009 and again in 2012, all motions on this particular matter were denied or deemed to have been already fully litigated. The defense argued in 2003 that the allegations against the accused in the first indictment suggest they were sufficiently proximate to the underlying crimes in the instant case so as to oblige the prosecution to list in the indictment all the names of the members of the groups in the indictment. The pretrial chamber rejected that argument, stating, quote, "Neither Stanišić nor Simatović are alleged to have physically committed the crimes charged personally," unquote. They are charged with commission through a JCE and other modes of liability. The names of the members of the groups were held to be evidence and not material facts, and the first indictment was found to be sufficiently specific on the matter of the inclusion of groups rather than names. I refer your honors to the decision on the defense preliminary motions of 14 November 2003, pages 3 to 4. The defense did not seek certification to appeal. In 2006, when the defense challenged the sufficiency of the Turnovo charges in the second amended indictment, asserting, inter alia, that the individual identities of the Bosnian Serb forces who handed over the Turnovo victims to the Scorpions are material facts. They were denied on this issue on the same grounds, that the names are a matter of evidence. That was on the 12th of April, 2006. The defense did not seek certification to appeal that decision. In 2009, when the defense filed an untimely challenge to the sufficiency of the third amended indictment, inter alia on the pleading of physical perpetrators, that motion was denied for lack of good cause for its untimeliness. That was their motion was filed on the 2nd of November 2009. The defense did not seek certification to appeal that decision. In their 2012 motion for exclusion of this evidence, inter alia on the grounds that the indictment was not sufficiently specific, the chamber held that the form of the indictment matter had already been fully litigated. That's a decision of this chamber on the 15th of August, 2012, at paragraph 11. Certification to appeal that decision was denied. The pretrial chamber's decisions in 2003 and 2006 on this issue were correct according to the jurisprudence. It is well established, Your Honors, that an indictment is required to plead the material facts upon which the prosecution relies, but not the evidence by which those material facts are to be proved. I refer Your Honors to the Furungia appeal judgment paragraph 147, the Kupreshkic appeal judgment, paragraph 88, and the Kvochka appeal judgment, paragraph 27. According to the Kvochka appeal judgment in paragraph 28, and the Kupreshkic appeal judgment in paragraph 89, the materiality of a particular fact depends upon, quote, the prosecution's characterization of the alleged criminal conduct and the proximity of the accused to the underlying crime, unquote. The 2003 and 2006 decisions of the pretrial chamber in this case found the pleadings to be sufficient. They found the names of physical perpetrators to be a matter of evidence, not material facts. They did not rest their decisions on the facts of other cases raised by the defense in their submissions. They rested their decisions on the facts of this case. Prior defense challenges on this ground have thus failed, and their last-minute attempt in their closing submissions to persuade the chamber to reconsider these decisions should also fail. At transcript page 38 today, the Simatović defense claimed, quote, "It is a notorious fact that a commander would not sign a document instead of his deputy using the formula 4 in the signature block," unquote, attempting to downplay the significance of Simatović's signature on the payment lists. Defense witness Mičić testified that this was not the case, that in the DB he, quote, always put the word za, meaning for, whether it was my superior or my subordinate that I was signing for, unquote. That's at transcript 19868. A few final responsive words about mens rea, Your Honors. May I please request private session?
Move into private session.
Your Honors, we are in open session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Registrar.
Your Honors, the Stanišić defense spent many words yesterday trying to demonstrate that Mr. Stanishic's actions show that he did not have the intent to commit the charged crimes. The Stanišić defense seeks to present Mr. Stanišić as a peacemaker. If only it had been, as asserted by the Stanišić defense, the intent of Mr. Stanišić to, quote, be in contact with the leadership to advance peace, to engage in, quote, quiet diplomacy, and to, quote, ameliorate the pain and suffering. If only his intent had not been criminal. Just imagine if a man of that character, influence, and fame, as cited by the Stanišić defense in their brief at paragraph 1261, would have exerted this influence not only to protect the expatriate UN hostages, but to protect the Bosniak, Trnovo, and Sanski Most victims. Imagine how history could have been different. The fact is that the accused continued to support Arkan and the Scorpions in their murderous acts during precisely the same time period as the hostage crisis. That is because, we assert, the killing of the expatriate UN hostages would not have furthered the common criminal plan. It would likely have blocked it. The ill-gotten gains of the criminal plan could only be made permanent through a peace plan that recognized them. Peace negotiations were an integral part of the plan and not evidence that no plan existed. Thank Thank you.
This concludes your rebuttal, Mr. Groom.
It does, Your Honor.
It
Thank you.
does. That's even before the planned end of this session. I think the wisest thing to do would be to take the break now, so that you at least have some time to prepare. Now, what would you prefer? We have 1 hour was reserved for the defense. If we would take a break now of 25 minutes, then we would have 1 hour and 25 minutes left. Do you want to use that time, or would you rather take a bit of a longer break? I'm also looking at...
We would like a shorter break, or the same time break, I should say.
The same, that is 25 minutes.
Yes.
And may I ask the prosecution to remain well within its time limits? Would there be any problem that the remainder of the time would be given to the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Then you divide among yourselves the remaining time, which would then be 1 hour and 25 minutes.
Thank you very much to Mr. Groom for that courtesy.
Yes. We take a break and we'll resume at 25 minutes to 6 o'clock.
All rise, vive le lever.